So that is why we are in such a hurry, and I say as a priority, to get to this point where we have the stabilization force in place, overseen by the border peace, and ultimately a Palestinian technocratic entity that can increase in its capability to provide governance. The stronger they are, the weaker Hamas will be in terms of threatening Israel. And I think the more security Israel should feel and the less need for some of these things to happen. But no one's claiming this is going to be easy. We have to work on this every single day. We have people in this building and deployed abroad. This is all they do. 24 hours a day, day after day, elements of the State Department, the Department of War, and all other agencies, including Jared and Steve, and even myself, who talk or do something about. There isn't a day in the last, this was signed 2 months ago, that I haven't had to do something with regards to making progress on the phases of the ceasefire. Yes, ma'am. Right next.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm
Secretary.
sorry. I'm going to get to you guys. I'm coming. See you going down the rows like this. So right behind you, I'm still in that row.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for having the
Has
briefing.
anyone ever done this where they go like all the rows?
No.
You're going to look so good to your editors. No? All right, go ahead.
Caroline Lumetto with World News Group. Several faith-based organizations have been calling on the administration to reopen the U.S. refugee admissions program, particularly for religious minorities facing persecution. That includes Afghanistan, Syria, Iran. Is it going to be a goal in 2026 to expand that program again beyond South Afrikaners?
Yeah, so here's the problem, okay? In the last 4 years, we had a flood of people enter this country through a variety of means. So that's what we confronted. We have to stop that. And we did. We've been successful. You see the border secured, the number of illegal entries has completely collapsed. And now we're facing a second challenge, and that is we've admitted a lot of people into the United States. And perhaps the overwhelming majority of them are not bad people and so forth. This is all true. But there are people, we know, okay, for a fact, that there are people in this country who got in through some form of vetting that was wholly insufficient. And we've seen tragic evidence of that very recently, including people that we claim to have vetted. So, why does that happen? Because there are some places where you can't vet people. You can only vet people on the basis of information you have about them. But that information is oftentimes dependent on whether there's some local authority that actually has any information about them. Okay, so that is the challenge we're facing, which is why the president has sort of put a stop to all of these things until these systems for admitting people into our country can be improved. But I think everyone would understand that after a flood of 15 to 20 million people into our country, almost unrestrained in some extent, over the last 4 years before taking over in January of this year, there's a desire in our country to put a stop to that until we can fix these processes to ensure that not only do we know who's in the country now, but in the future, we're not going to face some of these challenges that we faced in the past. So, look, the United States remains the most generous country in the world when it comes to legal immigration. This year alone, close to 1 million people will enter this country legally and have their green card and go to war. But we do have a right, like every sovereign country does, to know who you are, why you're coming, what you've done in the past, and what we think you might or might not do in the future. We have a right. We have a right to make sure that you're not going to come to this country and pose a burden on our social safety network. All of these things are rights of sovereign countries. A bunch of sovereign countries in the world do it. Most of the countries in the world have far more restrictive immigration policies than the United States has ever had. But we are in a special period right now. This is not like business as usual. This is, right now, we are less than a year removed from the most reckless migratory incompetence in American history, where a flood of people and mass migration events entered the United States. And they can claim all they want that they vetted people. This is just not true. Some of them were cursory vetting, and in some cases, you couldn't vet them, because the countries or places they came from had no documents upon which they could be vetted on. So that program will be studied, and it will not be restarted at the scale and scope it was until we are comfortable that it is one that we know everyone who's coming in and who they are and whether they meet the criteria for admission to the United States.
Do you
Yes,
have
ma'am.
any sort of
Thank you so
timeline for
much,
that?
Mr. Secretary. A follow-up on the conversation between President Trump and Maduro, because the day after the conversation, the president said he was going to be meeting that gentleman very soon. Is this still being considered? Is the president still considering that? Is still a chance for diplomacy on Venezuela? And also, any role that you see Brazil could play? Because just a few weeks ago, President Lula spoke with President Trump and Nicolas Maduro, and he offered to help to mediate the conversation.
Yeah, I'm not going
And,
to comment on any, as I said, I'm not going to comment on the president's talks. I will just point you to the fact that the thing about this president that I think you've seen is he's willing to talk to anybody. He's willing, he doesn't view talks as a concession. But I don't have any update to you on what comes next in that regard. I have no reason to express skepticism or optimism about it. I'm just not going to comment on what the president has available to him as options across the range of options that include diplomatic options.
And how about the conversation with Lula?
I mean, I think he said to us what he has said publicly, and that he has a willing to play a positive role in that regard. You know, the president's had 2 phone conversations and 1 meeting with President Lula. I think we've made progress on some things, including on trade. We have more work to be done. The 2 presidents got along. We felt that was important in terms of those conversations. I've talked to Mauro, their foreign minister, including this earlier this week. And we have a lot of issues in common with Brazil that we'd like to work together on, and strong links. Being from Florida, as an example, I know how important Brazil has been to us as a partner. We've had some disagreements on a couple things over the years as well, but I feel like that relationship is on a positive trajectory. But as far as its role in Venezuela, I don't have anything to provide you on that today of any specificity.
Just a quick
Yes, sir.
follow-up on
Thank
the
you.
tariffs, political tariffs
No,
on
I got to
Brazil.
get to him.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you very much for doing this. On phase 2 in Gaza, when is the soonest that we could see that being implemented? And then separately, you said at the top that you want the US to play the role of mediator that brings about the avoidance of war and ending conflicts. How do you square that position with a possible military intervention in Venezuela? Thank you.
Well, first of all, a couple things. Wanting to pursue peace and secure peace does not necessarily come at the expense of your national interest. We reserve the right and retain the option of defending our national interest. Now, in the case, again, we're going to talk about Venezuela. Let's be clear. Maduro has made multiple deals with elements around the world, including with the Biden administration. Okay, Maduro made a deal with the Biden administration, and here's the deal he made. And I only say this to you not because we want to get back to that deal, but just as an example of why the guy cannot be trusted to keep deals. It's a problem. Okay, somebody breaks deals multiple times. You have a right to be skeptical they're ever going to keep the deal. He made a deal, and as part of that deal, they lifted sanctions. They released his 2 nephews from federal custody after their conviction. They sent back his bag man, Alex Saab, and all these sorts of things. He released political prisoners, and he promised to have free and fair elections. He didn't have free and fair elections. He rearrested or exiled most of those political prisoners, so he pocketed all the benefits and lived to none of those commitments. So, look, it's hard to have and do a deal with someone who never keeps a deal. Now, on the broader perspective of what you're asking about, let's be mature here. Yes, there are issues where we want to pursue peace if that is possible, but we also have our national interest. If our national, we're not going to reach a peace deal with narco trafficking bans. We're not. We can't reach a peace deal with MS-13. We can't reach a peace deal with Tren de Aragua. We can't reach a peace deal with the ELN or the FARC that are still pumping drugs into the United States, or any of their cartels in Mexico. You can't do a peace deal with these people any more than you could do a peace deal with a mafia. So I think it's important to understand that's different between warring factions and nation states around the world, where we feel like maybe we could act as a bridge to bringing about the differences. But when you're talking about things that directly implicate the national interest of the United States, and no one can argue that transnational criminality and terrorism in our hemisphere is not a threat to the national interest of the United States, we reserve the right and have the right to utilize every element of national power to defend the national interest of the United States. And no one can dispute that. And every country in the world reserves the same option. We just simply have more power than some of them do.
And phase 2, Gaza?
Oh, phase 2 Gaza, yeah. I mean, we got to complete phase 1 to get to phase 2. That's why we're working every day to get there. Look, guys, if this stuff was easy, it would have been done already a long time ago. This is a complex situation. No one would dispute it, but it's important. What we achieved already, what the president achieved ending that war already, was something no one thought was possible. Everyone thought that the last episode was going to be an Israeli incursion into Gaza City that would lead to massive loss of life, and the hostages would never be reunited with their families. And today, as we speak, all the hostages that were living are back, all but I believe one of the bodies has been returned. No one would have believed that 6 months ago. So that in and of itself, but that is not the end of the story. We want to continue on this. But what we're talking about is dealing with something that no one has been able to solve in 30 or 40 years. No one. And it's going to take some time. But I feel generally optimistic that we have the right people at the table with the right motivations to make it happen. But no one is claiming to you that this is going to be just a straight up trajectory. It's going to have its ups and downs. It's going to have its, good days and bad days. The important point is that the momentum and the trajectory on it is a positive trajectory. And we're investing, high levels of our government every day in trying to make that happen. But we can't do it alone. We have all these other partners that we have to include. So I would focus you on, let's get the board of peace in place and announced. Let's get the technocratic Palestinian group in place. And then let's get the stabilization force in place. And then we can move on to the other elements, the phase 2 and phase 3 of the plan, that hopefully will be what will be enduring. And the work of putting phase 2 and phase 3 in place is going to extend far beyond the next 3 years. I mean, this is a generational commitment.